there when he was born over there. My Fulbright, it was basically to write. And so that the In Cod We Trust, this book was what I wrote. It's just like the experience of an American in Norway, essentially. Which in the beginning, they just thought like, you don't know what you're doing. It's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I need to go to Norway, right? So that was the whole idea. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, usually, especially in Trondheim, it's for science because it's a big science university. Oh yeah, from Chernobyl, or yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was in Italy when Chernobyl blew. Yeah, hi.
They call Norwegians on the phone. So we know that the happiness factor of like countries, especially the Nordic countries, they're the happiest, but it's kind of, they should be the happiest, right? Based on the global goal you showed.
Mhm.
But you also mentioned that, you know, Italians complain, but Norwegians tend to not complain. So would you think if you called them on the phone, would they actually be honest? Because right, John's little, they can't complain, or would they actually say that? Or would they just say it because they don't want to complain?
Yeah, well, they generally wouldn't say, "Oh yes, we're so happy, we're so great." They wouldn't. That's bad for them.
They would still be.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they would point out though, well, but we do have, health insurance. I mean, especially, the Norwegians are very tuned into what's going on here in the US. Because some Norwegians, I was surprised, even said, well, we're like the 51st state. I'm like, really? Yeah. Yeah, Greenland or Canada. Yeah. Well, and see, I was now, with the premier from Ontario talking about California and all of that. Like, maybe we'll ask them if they want to become part of Canada. I'm like, what about Minnesota?
Feel this, that some of the preservation of like Norwegian culture is really here, like some of the foods, because you showed how people were more modern. And then I just heard, kind of, this was out of Norwegian Embassy, that the young Norwegians don't understand some of the history with Norwegian Americans coming here, or some of the older things. So like maybe Sons of Norway is helping preserve that, and then this crossings 200, that the idea is to kind of teach them too. Like we learn
Yep.
about our heritage in Norway, but they also learn about the coming to the United States too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in the summer, I do one of the Concordia language villages. I don't do the Norwegian village, but there's the Norwegian village, and they get a lot, Skufjorden. So they have a lot of concerts coming from Norway, and the concerts are always like, what is going on here? They think it's kind of stepping into the past, but it is that preservation of that history too. That, for example, the idea of egg coffee, that we have, that we still, some people still do in the Midwest, but they haven't even heard of it anymore in Scandinavia. It's long gone. They're drinking cappuccinos and all these fancy things. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, because when friends from Norway have come to visit, they said, you're more Norwegian than we are, just because it's more important here, even though, most of us can't speak Norwegian, or Norwegian's bad like mine. But, what does it mean to be Norwegian? I think it's a good question. Yeah. Little Norway, I guess they just didn't get enough people there. Yeah, they disbanded. I mean, it's still there, the stuff farmstead is, yeah, Mount Horeb in southern Wisconsin, near Madison. Yeah, so most of the buildings are still there, but the that church that was brought over, actually, Wrigley, like Wrigley's gum, had it for a while as a movie theater, and then it went to Little Norway and kind of got moved around a little bit. Yeah.
As far as you know, do they still have mandatory military service and all?
I don't know where that's. I think that they were slowly getting rid of it. When I talked to friends over there, they said it's not like, it's sort of an honor to be asked to be in the military now. That if you're that.
All people. One thing that you said, Norway is the happiest place on earth. However, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Norwegians have several battalions of men over there, about 2,500, 2,800 people, commanded by a female major general, Kristen Lund.
Okay.
So proportionally, they had more people in Iraq than we did in the United States. 340 million people, we had 80,000, they had 2,800 people.
Oh, wow.
Norway
Okay.
was 526, so they're happy, but they also have an army.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and they're definitely part of NATO because they're worried about Russia, right? And it was just interesting, people talking over there. I mean, this is before the new president came back, but just they're really worried, with all of the little incursions of Russia and what they're doing. Did you have a question? Yeah.
They suffered 50 or 60% off. Very much.
Mhm. Yeah.
So they have a big part.
Yeah, so they know, I mean, they have all of these coasts, but having that coast also makes you vulnerable too, right? Yeah, question.
When your son got kind of stuck in Oslo with his dog friend, did you drive the 6 hours from Bergen to pick him up and then go back to the trip, or did he just get on the next flight to Bergen?
He did get on the flight the next day to Bergen. Yeah. I know, and he was fine. He's like, oh yeah, it's great. He's 15. He doesn't realize like, okay. And fortunately, Norway's an incredibly safe country for the most part. So he's just, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and he had been to Skufjorden for several years, so he did speak some Norwegian, but then, trying to get him to speak Norwegian when we were there, and he would kind of fumble through his English and do, so it's like you gotta, I mean, it's in a way we needed to go visit those. When we visited our relatives up in Buda, then we had to speak Norwegian because our Norwegian is slightly better than their English, which is good. Yeah.
Your son have dual citizenship?
Norway doesn't do birthright citizenship. And see, I had assumed that he would, and because I just thought everywhere did, but then I learned all about that. Nope, they do not. So he would have to live in Norway for, I don't know, 3 years or something. And then, I mean, now you can be a dual citizen, but that's a fairly new thing. It's only a couple years that they allow the dual citizens. So, yeah. What did
nice dishes at people's houses?
Oh, and the Lofoten? Oh, yeah, yeah. So when we were, okay, this is when our son was a baby and we got invited up to Lofoten, to the islands up there. And if you ever, I don't know, I would argue that Lofoten is the most beautiful spot in Norway, which is saying a lot. I mean, it's because the fjords are so impressive, but I don't know, for me, it's claustrophobic, like kind of being down in there. Whereas Lofoten, it's more open and the light is always this incredible light. And so when we went up there, we stayed at one of the rorbuer, the fishing houses, like I showed on the edge of the water. And they have a little kitchenette because we couldn't afford to eat out, so we had to go shop. And none of the stores had fish. We're like, well, where's the fish for sale? And they're like, well, no, we don't have any. We don't. And then finally, we asked, like, they have all the fish drying out on the spits of land. And said, well, can we buy one of those at least? And they're like, no, no, no. This is all going down to Portugal and Spain and Italy, where they'll spend a lot of money for this stuff, right? Even though they have the Mediterranean and fresh fish down there, I don't understand that. So finally, we found in a little convenience store, they had a little fish counter with fresh fish that they had. But we got invited over to some friends of our friend who was there, the relatives who lived on kind of on the other side of the island. And we're so excited, like, okay, we knew that the father was a fisherman. And so we're going to have fresh fish from the North Sea. And, it's great, not going to be better than that. And so they had this beautiful table laid out with all the tablecloths and candles and all that. And what do they bring out but a turkey? And they'd ordered it way ahead of time because they thought, well, yeah. Yeah, really tough. They had to order it. And, then they cooked it way too long. It's kind of dried out. They thought, well, because that's what Americans eat, right? It's like if we had Norwegians coming here and we served them cod, they'd be like, can't we have something else? Yeah. Yeah, right. It gives them American waffles. I did have rockfisk. Yes, yes. Yeah, no, and I wrote about having rockfisk here because gravlocks, maybe most of you know about gravlocks, which used to be buried for like 3 days, but they don't really bury it anymore. But does you know about rockfisk? Because you can't really get it in the US. So rockfisk it's either trout like rock uret or rockfisk, and it used to be buried for 3 months, 4 months, something like that. But now they have a different way of doing it, but uh, essentially it's fermented fish and it's super intense and yeah. And then when I got it, it's kind of salty, really intense flavor. And when I had it, we had it in Trondheim. Intense flavor. And he said, well, you have to have akavit with it. And so he gives me some akavit, and then I start like, you kind of do need to have akavit, but then it's like my in-laws were visiting, and then I'm sitting here drinking all this akavit and can barely move afterwards. So yeah, it's not a good scene. Yeah. So be careful with that. There's a reason you can't get it here. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So all right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a treat. It's always nice to come back. So, because I was trying to think how many years ago I was here, like 7 years, 8 years ago. So it's been a while. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Oh, and I should mention, I do have some books up here that I lugged out from Minnesota and hope to not have to lug all the way back. Yeah, here, let me stop.